And boom, according to that, I am live. Welcome, my name is Hiko Simon. This is Tokyo Tonight. It's 10:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time. Just refreshing the screen to get the comments on board. Yeah, sorry, just had some technical issues setting up. I need to reset the camera settings. But yes, indeed, December indeed whizzing through. It is December 11th today, almost the end of the year. Always crazy how it does that. Let me just adjust the camera there a little bit. Good to see we've already got Odie Jr. in here. Woo, got bada bing, bada boom. Good morning, Odie Jr. Good to see you. Quint Ranked, good to see you as always. We've got Lysander 45 whizzing by, and yeah, thanks. We've got 8 people watching right now. 2 likes. 2 likes is good. I'll take that. Not wearing the glasses thing today. I'm just sort of settling down a little bit. I was actually just thinking to myself before the show, I haven't done any live music for a while, and it's something that I want to get back into doing. Might even put it down as a New Year's resolution or something like that to get back into that. I think there's interesting tools, and one thing I guess I'm now it's getting more real that I'm going to be. It looks like it'll be for 4 months probably in America next year. So yeah, if I can do that, I mean I'll be on my own for 4 months. So I guess it'll be a good chance to pick up some things like the old music making and stuff like that while I'm over there. So yeah, I'm not really the New Year's resolution type, but that's probably something that I'm going to get into a bit more. People like DJ Sunny Side Up keeping me inspired. I loved your. I watched the whole thing. I watched your awards, and then I went and watched the whole live stream of, and I've forgotten his name, but I like the third place getter that you had on the people who did rap tracks over your backbeats that you made, your beats that you made for people. So that was awesome. Good job, DJ Sunny Side Up. And yeah, that's pretty cool that you have a bunch of people that send you, that basically rap over your beats for you. That's really cool. I've had that like once or twice. People have done that for me, and it blew my mind actually having people do that. So yeah, I want to do that, but in order to do live music, I need to actually go and I need to get a certain cable so I can split the sound out in headphones so that I can hear what's going on my iPad. And right now, I can't find that cable. So I might have a dig around at the end of the show, but if I couldn't find it before the show, I won't find it at the end of the show. But I do want to get back into it, so maybe another week anyway. Listening to a bunch of drum and bass, 4 evac styles, yes indeed. Listening to a bunch of drum and bass today, I guess, also has me a bit inspired. It's kind of good to follow a genre of music. I used to DJ drum and bass in New Zealand before I came out here, and I've always enjoyed listening to it. And it's one of those things that, unlike other forms of particularly electronic music, it's never quite gotten big enough to become a fad to go out of style. Other types of music like, two-step and garage and, dubstep and, even you take sort of house and disco and stuff like that. They all sort of go through these peaks, which there's always a backlash. And it's kind of crazy to me just reflecting how drum and bass has been around, properly for like more than 30 years. And it still is awesome, and it's still, still is out there. So yeah, I've been enjoying that. More royalty-free tracks for the Tokyo Digital crew. Well, yes, indeed. I mean, it's something I must admit I want to get back into doing. It's always just a matter of time, right? There's only how many hours in the day, and I've got to decide how to spend them, But yeah, I think having some more time to myself will probably give me some more of that opportunity. So looking forward to that. Second place is from Swaziland. Wow, I had no idea. This is on your rap challenge. That's pretty cool. I have a quick PSA. 11 people watching right now, but anyone watching this in Tokyo, apparently, if you want eggnog, and I kind of pretended not to know what eggnog is. I know that eggnog is like in American movies about Christmas, and there's always the joke that grandma's had too much eggnog and now is acting as an agent of chaos in the plot. And I've always kind of gotten the idea. It seems to be, it's called eggnog and it's creamy and alcoholic or something. So I've always had this idea. It must be like alcoholic custard or something like that. But I've never known for sure exactly what it is. But whatever it is, Akasan from Comics Plus has been apparently his regular Yamaya shop. Yamaya, by the way, an import shop, which has lots of cool, mainly alcohol, but also other imported goods. Apparently where he normally gets his eggnog, they're not stocking it this year, so he's desperately looking around for people in Tokyo who know where you can get eggnog. And so there's a whole bunch of people over the internet looking for this. If you know where to find eggnog in Tokyo for this year, hit me up or hit Akasan up directly because he's looking for it. I must admit, I'm kind of curious myself. I mean, geez, eggnog with Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. That doesn't sound good. Is that good? I mean, I kind of have an idea from the movies that it looks kind of good. But yeah, I've never been in a place that has it, and of course, the idea of having it because of the cold. I come from a place with hot Christmases. You hang out, have a barbecue, and go to the beach. So, it's midsummer for me is Christmas. So, even now, I try as much as possible to fly back. Not planning to do that this year, but yeah, probably, well, certainly next year anyway. We'll be doing that. But good to see more people rocking in here. We've got Christian. Schuhart, yes, good to have you in the chat, and nice to see fresh names popping up there. Good to see you. Traveling Gabriel says that eggnog is gross. Also, people acknowledging it's an acquired taste, which I mean, I must admit, I've never tried it before, so I'd be curious just to try it to see what Chevy Chase Christmas movies are going on about. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me. So yeah, that was the main PSA. Yeah, got a bunch of topics lined up, but I've been thinking more about the. It is funny how someone said earlier, how was it Lysander45 commenting how December's flying by, and yes, indeed, if I'm leaving Japan in February, and it could be like early February, if I want to do a tweet up in Tokyo, it really has to be like mid-January. And I was just looking at the calendar just before, and really January 14 or January 21 are really the only dates that make sense. Just thinking, I might do a January 21, just off the top of my head. I'm going to contact the Tokyo Sports Cafe where I organized the YouTube parties previously years ago. Hopefully it's still the same manager there. Not sure if that's the case, but for now, I'll confirm over Twitter this week, and I'll confirm on the show next week. But yeah, if you're in Tokyo or visiting Tokyo, and in fact, Saturday, yeah, I think if I just say that rather than try to book the place out, I'll just say, let's just meet there. It's a big enough place. And yeah, it's good to go somewhere familiar. So I'll probably look to do something like on January the 21st. I might make it January the 14th, but probably January 21st, Saturday night, Tokyo Sports Cafe. Yeah, in Roppongi, I'll do that, and it would be awesome to get to say hello to people. I mean, it's been 2 years pretty much since I've seen anyone from the internet community. So anyone who watches these YouTube shows, anyone who I've interacted with on Twitter or Mastodon or Facebook or anything like that, would be very, very cool to say hello in person. And of course, I'll definitely do a meetup when I'm in Seattle, given that looks like that's now increasingly going to happen. So definitely keen to do that as well. But yeah, it'd be nice to get to see some people in common. And as much as, the other thing as well is I got pinged by Zach that he is organizing already. I think he said it'll be like the final week of March. He's already going to organize the next YouTube Hanami. I've always been against setting it that far in advance. Taking on the instructions from the great Tokyo Kuni. I've said this every year. The magic of Hanami is that you don't really know when it's going to happen until like a week before. And when I always said, well, what about people who want to travel to Tokyo and make plans to come and join the party? Tokyo Kuni was always like, well, screw you guys. It's the Tokyo Hanami. If you're not from Tokyo and you want to come and do the party when it's not the Hanami, screw you. And screw is a polite way of putting the way that he put it. And I bought into that logic, but it is admittedly a bigger event now. And I suppose that if you are going to pick a random week to do it, I think end of March is the right one. I will not be in Japan for that, but I will share information about that for people interested. I think now we are beyond, frankly, it is at a point now where even in Japan, the numbers for COVID are going up again. But I think the fatigue is even hitting in Japan. The idea that people are not going to, meet people for a third year. I think people are sort of tiring of that. Not quite as far gone as places like America and Europe, where people are not even bothering to mask anymore. But I think Japan is slowly coming out the other side of this. So, yeah, with all those normal cautions in place, I will be probably making some plans around doing a meetup. In fact, I might even do it during the day, frankly, rather than at night. Night just gets a bit hairy anyway, and that might be easier in terms of planning, actually. So I'll see about that anyway. Details to come, but look out for January 21st to do a Tokyo myself. tweet up, meet up, YouTube up, or whatever. If you'd like to say hello, I'd love to get to say hello to all of you folks. Kahlua coffee liquor is better, says DJ Sunnyside Up. I believe that, and that's probably what, I think my image of what eggnog is anyway. Again, not having an idea. So, yeah. Christian Schurhart. Oh, you mean me pronouncing your name? I would say world-class job on the name. It's a cool name. Now I'm congratulating myself when I'm not quite sure that's correct. I might have actually gotten it wrong and be congratulating myself, which can make it even worse. Anyway, that said, let's dive into the topics. It's already 47 minutes past. Let's jump in. The debate continuing to rage online about the Japan JLPT test with the usual takes, and I will repeat those that I normally have. Hey, Dan H., good to see you there in the chat. So this is not about the JLPT, now that I come think of it. This is about Japan's language proficiency continuing to fall in terms of kind of not really fair in places like Singapore, where English is really considered more of a, in fact, is that why it's highlighted, that it is English is an official language? But yeah, or maybe it's indicative by continent, but it is funny. Netherlands has the highest rate of English proficiency. It's practically, I suppose, people use it there as practically as a first language. But Japan, behind Mongolia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, China, Japan 80th on the world rankings of English proficiency, falling in spite of all of the investment that the Japanese government's made in having language teachers come and teach in Japan, and everything else. I have a hot take on this as to why this is happening. I think it's really what's happened in the 20 years that I've been in Japan. When I came to Japan, English teaching was a big deal because everyone wanted to learn English, not because so much that they wanted to live abroad. It's always been in us, people who want to escape from Japanese society. It was always an escape. But I think it was still throughout the bubble, and even after the bubble collapsing, English was always a way to get ahead in Japanese society. If you wanted to, get a job at a trading house, the most popular companies or whatever, you needed to often have an MBA from an American university and be proficient in English to be able to handle all of those sort of global export jobs. And the other alternative was that if that high pressure, high competitive society was like you wanted to opt out of that, you'd learn English to get out of Japan and not come back. And a lot of people did that as well. And what noticeably happened, I think, since the year 2000, the 20 years that I've been here, of course, is that the Japanese economy has declined. Japan isn't really a big exporter anymore. It just pays for stuff to get made in China or in other countries or whatever. The big trading houses are no longer the big places to work. Even in areas of technology that Japan used to lead in, like phones, are now dominated by foreign companies. A whole bunch of sort of IT and tech areas. So English has no longer become really a way to get ahead. The sort of jobs that demanded it, and also with, of course, people increasingly realizing that the prospects for the country becoming elderly and overtaxed and so on. It's just there's been a generation come up where basically the idea that if you get an MBA, that you're guaranteed lifetime employment at a big trading house, that promise has pretty much collapsed, and everyone's just been kind of comfortable becoming gradually less ambitious. And there's good and bad to that. I kind of think that the pressure cooker nature of the society has declined a lot. It still is high pressure for a lot of people. But I think that kind of pressure to take English to succeed or to escape kind of motive is kind of both avenues. There's a lot of people who just, the culture, a big culture change that's happened in Japan is people who just work on contracts and change jobs, frequently and so on. And people being happy to have a kind of a decent quality life without being overly ambitious is something that's become a reality since I've been in Japan. So, I gave my hot take on this on Twitter, which was that English until the 1990s was a way for Japanese people to get ahead. Now the value of that's pretty much gone. The real value of English going forward, perhaps, is Japanese escaping, I think, Japan's kind of inevitable decline. It's going to be a high tax, low income. I mean, the fact that the trainees, the much abused trainee workers coming to work in factories and hospitals and so on, often from Southeast Asia and so on, and now finding that Japanese wages are just not even competitive against like Vietnam or Philippines sufficiently for people to come and want to work here anymore. And I think, yeah, it's going to flip around where it's going to be English is not going to be a way for getting ahead in Japanese society. On the contrary, it's going to be an escape mechanism for people to get out of the country and possibly even to become the Vietnamese factory workers. Japanese might go abroad to earn money or not learn English and settle for a quieter life here in Japan. That's where I think it's going. However, that said, when you think of the amount of investment that the Japanese government has put into English education and trying to lift Japan's ranking and how badly it's paid off, I think there are some bigger questions to be asked. Yeah, I just see this as Japan going into kind of a gentle, comfortable decline, is my perception. And including people not quite feeling under so much pressure, at least competitive pressure, to get good at English. You know, people do it as a hobby or whatever, but what can you do? Dan H pointing out, even though the Dutch can speak very good English, they hate speaking it. Yeah, I don't have much of it other than Dutch people, a bit like Scandinavians that I've met, consistently have better English than most people from the UK that I've met. I mean, no joke, no joke. Oh, you know, you meet people from, setting aside accents and so on. Well, you know, there's a lot of not very educated people in the UK. I think the education systems are no doubt much better in Scandinavia. I think they probably understand English grammar better than most people, better than the average person from England understands their own grammar. So, yeah, no, credit to the Europeans. I was talking with a German friend, actually, how the thing that they appreciated about having UK in the EU was how Germans are sort of comfortable using English as a lingua franca, and having UK there helped to sort of also stop France trying to dominate everything, like without UK trying to dominate everything itself. It kind of offered a certain balance that now that it's gone, you know, now it's kind of a legitimate question now. Why should English be the lingua franca of Europe when the UK isn't even it anymore? But the convenience, the truth is, it's the convenience that so many countries there are so good at it already. But obviously, for some countries, that's not a good state of things. Anime Samurai, good to see you. Comment there. I speculate that because those other countries, English is used more practically, not just academically or in a classroom, perhaps shyness in practicing the language too. Shyness is definitely a huge inhibitor for Japan. It's also a factor in countries like Spain. I must admit, I'm curious where Spain would be on this list. I'm sure it's a long way down. Yeah. But the thing is, Japan's ranking has fallen. You know, it's really tried, and it seems to be doing worse over time. So that's what I find interesting. And by the way, to Anime Samurai and anyone wanting to make a comment, do what Dan H did. Just say my name there, and as you can see, it will highlight orange. And if it highlights orange, I know that you're saying something to me. And if it's a comment or a question, I will pay special attention to that in between stories and respond back. The main bit of news this week: the Parliament's closing, and Kishida, who's currently like popularity rankings are like tanking. I am already a subscriber, but I don't want to log in right now. I'll just flash up the title here. He kind of did a live 7 p.m. sort of briefing, trying to say basically that he has done lots of things and he shouldn't be as unpopular as he is. He's unpopular mainly because of of course, the whole Unification Church scandal goes back originally. It still is a bit weird to me that the assassin of Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister, was the son of a member of the Unification Church who, like a lot of these cults do, had spent half of her life savings on donations to the church, hoping that it would get her ahead in going to heaven and whatnot. And the son of this member, of this woman, this person's mother, basically she bankrupted the family, and he felt very angry and resentful towards this cult or this religion. And when he found out that the former prime minister, like President Trump, and other celebrity sort of politicians, had received paid speaking engagements with the Unification Church, he thought that it would be kind of a way to get back at the church was to assassinate the former prime minister. And normally you would assume that, okay, he has an agenda against that religion, but, you can't let the terrorists win whatever. The government shouldn't take up his cause. They should focus on, prosecuting this terrible assassin. But Japan's kind of different. Everybody did say, well, yeah, he kind of had a point, which he might have, but they really should have separated things a little bit more. But of course, what turned out was that, like several religions in Japan do, UC is one of the churches that engages in basically trying to gain influence, political influence, partly to protect its status as a registered religion where it's tax-free and where it does all sorts of money-raising activities. But basically they offer their followers up for all of their local churches, offer to volunteer to campaign for politicians. And they are not the only cult that does it. In fact, there is another larger religion which has a whole political party, but because the constitution bans mixing of politics and religion, they claim that the party that they support is actually secular and has nothing to do with their religion. It's just a coincidence that it's completely backed by the members of one of Japan's largest Buddhist sects. But yeah, the Unification Church, very similarly, not having as many members, so not so much a big voting bloc, but looking to gain influence by basically offering up their services to campaign, both to donate funds to politicians for their election campaigns and to help them hand out leaflets and support the electioneering activities. And so when this came up as the cause of the assassination, and the LDP did a sort of an audit, said we're going to get out everybody who's received help from this cult, not really knowing how bad the problem was. It turned out that, it's triggered multiple cabinet resignations. It looks like just about everybody in the LDP has received help from this cult. And the result is that Kishida just looks like, he's been it's severely undermining his credibility, because it looks like, at least on his watch, it's come out that his party is, beholden to this pretty abusive cult. At least that's abusive towards its members, and does all the things that cults do. They break up families, they separate people, they extract money out of them. But arguably, again, like certain religions do, like cults do, like certain money-making schemes and Ponzi schemes and con schemes sort of do. And the point is, there are laws against these sorts of, nefarious types of fundraising activities that exist, but they've just never been enforced against cults, in spite of like tens of thousands of complaints, just because the police don't want to be seen as infringing on, religious freedom or whatever. It's too sensitive and they don't want to get into it. And added dimension with the Unification Church, because it's a Korean church, so it also looks like ethnic discrimination, which again the police didn't want to get into. But now that they've opened this up, and these laws are there to enforce both against sort of scams like MLMs as well as religious groups. The Kishida's just cited that they're basically, in record time, they've passed a law which will basically, if they find that donations were made by people under coercion, including threats that you need to pay this money in order to not go to hell, and not only donations, but like buying spiritual goods, like buying little dolls and trinkets and stuff like that, like a $5 plastic pen for $1,000 or something like that, which these religions do, and they mark it up as tax-free and as donations. But if anyone who later regrets doing that, under this law, they'll be able to claim those donations back. And while it's being used to target specifically one religion, it applies equally to organizations such as, again, multi-level marketing schemes, or other religions as well. It'd be particularly interesting to see if the government's brave enough to do it against other religions which are not the subject. Of course, only really one religion's ever been shut down in Japan before, and that was Aum Shinrikyo, the cult that did the Tokyo sarin gas attacks, and they are still being followed by the media and the police, and they're pretty much, not allowed to be treated like a religion anymore. But yeah, the whole idea of the sort of protection of religions is partly a legacy of World War II, of course. It's partly a legacy of the fact that Japan, in terms of when it raised the status of state Shinto, it did suppress other religions, including Soka Gakkai, one of the other big politically involved religion that I just mentioned. And they often called out that they were dissidents. They were speaking out against Japan in World War II. But kind of importing this wholesale like freedom of religion idea into Japan, I think is brought in all of these kind of problems, which I still think, I don't know, they should be taxed and supervised just like, businesses or any other type of organization. It's kind of given them free rein to do crazy things. So yeah, we'll see anyway. But they're calling in that they've passed this law, and of course they're not allowed to pass laws that are just aimed to discriminate against a certain religion, but clearly that's the intention here. So it'll be interesting to see if they actually do enforce it when Catholic Church members want to recall their donations. I wonder if that would actually be possible, if that would work, or indeed if you are if your skincare, herb MLM, can you get your money back from Utah? Who knows? I heard somewhere that MLM stands for Mormons losing money. Apparently, MLMs are really big in Utah. I have no idea why that would be, but yes, funny thing. Hey, Wingstar, good to see you there in the chat. And Dan H, I'm forgetting about the most recent cult, which was formed by the LDP, New Capitalism. Well, they haven't really decided what that is yet, which I suppose does give it a religious quality. That last I heard, I don't know, Dan H, have you heard what New Capitalism is, other than the same as, basically they've said it's capitalism with with social awareness and sensitivity, which is basically what Japanese capitalism has kind of been all along, like kind of socialist capitalism. It's been kind of weird. So, yeah, as soon as they come up with what it is, sure, they can register that as a religion and then turn themselves in. I'll look forward to that. I'll call out, shout out to, I've got to stop this thing playing. I don't want it to make noise. Hope Doe from Twitter. Hope she doesn't mind. Her Twitter handle is that name. I'm not sure if that's an alias or artist name or whatever, but she's an artist on Twitter, and I've been enjoying some DM conversations with her where she is understandably concerned about this generative AI, which I showed on the show last week, that there are all of these apps coming out based on these different AI engines which can now generate art of all sorts of kinds, and really astounding actually seeing those profiles, the way it was able to generate sort of those profile AI images of me. And yeah, she shared with me a video by the YouTube channel Proco. It's really long. It's ethical AI art, or AI ethics artists and what you can do about it. And it's a 1.5 hour long discussion. I listened to it while I was running. It's a really good video. It took about 30 minutes, frankly, to get going. It was a bit of a mess in the first 30 minutes. But by the end of it, yeah, I actually came to realize that the speakers were a lot better informed than I thought they were for the first 30 minutes. and where do I land on this? I've shared before, I've worked at tech companies and as a lawyer, and I'm basically a tech company lawyer. So I have a bias towards, one, liking technology, and two, being interested in these types of topics. And yeah, there's kind of two. This was a great discussion where they went through all of the concerns about particularly generative AI for art that can create art, and all of the concerns around it. Some of them overblown and some of them emotional and some of them quite rational and legal and reasonable. And it summarized them all really well, and actually it took them a while to push past their prejudices. And you could tell, I think in the beginning, it comes across like they don't even want to deal with the arguments for the technology. But you realize towards the end of it, it's because they're used to going through the steps of these debates and they're tired of it. But they do actually set out the steps later on. But fundamentally, yeah. Look, the big fundamental problem is that most of these AI generative engines, you can only create good AI with lots of data. The more data, the better quality the AI. And most of in the sort of arms race to create different types of AI. Like I've been loving playing around with JLPT this week. And it's amazing to see what it can turn out. So, you have to feed it lots of stuff, and the correct way to use materials without stepping on anyone's toes is to either commission the creation of those materials yourself, or to take the trouble to search and check the copyright status of materials. And remembering that copyright law in most countries now applies copyright protection by default. When you create something, you have copyright in it when it's created. It used to be that you'd actually have to register copyright in something for it to be protected, whereas nowadays you just have to prove authorship, basically, and you have authorship rights by default, which means that everything on the internet is protected basically by copyright by default, and you can only give a lesser protection if it's old, or if you affirmatively use something like a Creative Commons license, which I used to make a big deal about, where you intend to share it. And if you can't find either of those things, then you are allowed to use it for certain types of purposes like academic research and so on, which is how many of these AI engines were developed. But you're not allowed to use it for commercial purposes, which is how these engines, which were often developed in academic contexts where it was okay to use all of that copyrighted material, you can't use those engines for commercial purposes, and they are being used for commercial purposes, at least if they were developed being trained on material that they didn't have permission to use, which is almost impossible to do without. It is possible to create to create training data, which is properly vetted, but of course it's much more work. It costs money, and you're going to end up with a smaller data set, which won't produce as good an AI. If you do it the right way, eventually you will be able to still create, AI that will constantly improve and get better. And it will end up at the same place. It'll just take longer to get there. So when you think of all of that, it's more trouble, it's expensive, and it doesn't produce as good a result. And particularly if developers don't feel like there's a risk of enforcement, that, the artist, how are they going to find out that they used your data in the training? They're just going to do it. There's a question asked in the interview, why don't, when they have generative music AIs, they talked about how those music AIs, they were much more careful not to use copyrighted music when training those AIs. And they asked, why were they more careful when they were creating training data for generative music AIs than art AIs? I think the answer to that is simple. Music companies, you saw how they reacted when people started stealing their stuff, like with Napster and with MP3s and so on. They went nuts, and not just suing companies that were profiting from it. They even went after people, users, super aggressive. I mean, music companies are large, powerful intellectual property trolls in a way. I mean, put another way, they're IP companies that basically their whole business model is based on monetizing intellectual property. And they're equipped to protect it, and artists are not. And there's an argument that if artists want to make sure that they don't get ripped off, or that they're treated by developers with the proper respect, and with the legal respect, and that their rights are properly observed, they probably have to become something like music companies, which obviously they can't. But I think that was the interesting thing there. So the first question was, is it even possible, to do? And I think it is possible to do legally, to create these engines. But the other half of it is, well, even then, is it okay? Because it's going to put a lot of artists out of work. It's going to disrupt, professional art creation. And I think that's right, but I think that's inevitable. And what I always say about this, and what I like to talk about on the show over and over, that's what, since the Industrial Revolution, right? That's what technology has done. It's disrupted, and it's put people out of work. And in some respects, it might put people out of work, and in other respects, it might open up new avenues to be creative. It might enhance your ability to be creative, doing additional things. Artists might start out with a generated AI image that they then work off and improve. They've got a better starting place. I can imagine that with music. In fact, like I talk about with my DJing example, when you can automate beat matching, which used to be all of what DJing used to be was beat matching. When that became automated, it became much more about effects, creating live music on the fly, putting on a show, controlling lights, controlling video images. All of a sudden, DJs were freed up, to actually make a lot of music and to do different stuff. So, it just frees up your capacity to think, okay, well, if it was much, much easier to realize, an artistic image, then what would you do with all of that extra time to make it better? What can really creative people achieve? And that's what I'm looking forward to about this technology. But it was a really, really good discussion about the technology, about the legal aspects, and about the possibilities, and frankly, the inevitable disruption that it's going to bring to artists, including YouTubers. I think that we're not far away at all from the idea of starting with, right now we have these virtual tubers that people control, where you just have an image like looking at my face, and, sort of there's an overlay of the body. But pretty soon, I think you'd be able to have like a show like this, where the whole thing could be AI, including going through the news from the last week, generating a script and delivering it in an interesting way. It might even look like me. It might even be sort of photorealistic. And I don't think we're far away from that, actually, looking at this technology. But yeah, Anime Samurai, automatic DJ. Haven't heard of this. Well, it's super easy. I mean, right now, most mixing of sets is done on computers. And what they'll do is you just pick two tracks, and it will just, the computer will do the beat matching for you. It used to be you'd play two records, and you'd have to adjust the speed of the records and listen to the two records separately at the same time and physically match the beats. And that's what I learned how to do. That's how I learned when I was DJing drum and bass. Nowadays, no, you just say track A, track B, and the computer will match up the beats for you. You don't have to do anything. So all you've got to do is just pick out the tracks, pretty much. But since that's easy to do, now you have to think about other things that you can do then. What can you do live? What can you do to make it more interesting? But yeah, that was something that got automated a long time ago. And, that's a small example. You think about how art is enhanced by having computer-aided design tools. And this is another thing like that. And, it'll be same with making music. You'll say, instead of doing all the beats, you'll say, okay, lay down this sort of a beat. We'll start out with this sort of a pattern, a bass line. And, you work with it like you'd be jamming pretty much. I think it'll be the same. It'll be like having a robot band musician that you get to jam with when you're making, rather than having to do everything from scratch. And I think that's kind of cool. But it's fascinating technology, and particularly with ChatGPT and the stable diffusion art generation tools that are around at the moment, it's pretty fascinating where it's all going. Pardon me. So, yes, indeed. Going down to the comments, Sainted Sir, good to see you. Hello, indeed. Next topic. There was the announcement of 8 artists will journey around the moon on a futuristic SpaceX flight. So, yes, indeed. Yusaku Maezawa, the founder of ZoZoTown, the big online clothes shopping website in Japan, a sort of an Amazon Rakuten, but just for clothes, quickly became very, very rich, and he's a bit of a space nerd. He's already been into space. He's been up to the ISS. He flew up on a Russian rocket some years ago. And apparently, when SpaceX said that they wanted to do a test run of a manned flight around the moon with the lunar starship that they're sort of preparing, and this is the spaceship that they want to use to fly people out to Mars eventually. He basically paid for it, he booked one of those flights all to himself. A bit of a kind of a playboy billionaire of sorts. Maezawa, originally when he booked this, he kind of implied that he was just going to take up a bunch of sort of a harem of hostesses and girlfriends to go around the moon with him. And why wouldn't you? I mean, if you're rich. But apparently he was talked into trying to do something a little bit more interesting with it. So he decided to take up, artists and so on. He took people up, basically the 8 people. They don't all show up on the image there, but and can I remember off the top of my head, he's taking DJ Steve Aoki, who's getting some bashing, and another musician, Korean musician, Choi Sung-hyung, as well as a photographer, videographer, artist. He's got an actual space YouTuber, the Everyday Astronaut, Tim Dodd, Indian actor, and as backup crew members, a dancer called Miu, who I've never heard of, but I must admit, because of this, now I've seen her channel, and yeah, she looks pretty cool. Or I've seen her Instagram. And Caitlin Farrington, a snowboarder, will be backups. And it's not clear when they'll be able to fly around the moon. Like right now we have Artemis flying around the moon. This will be on a bigger rocket. And I'm not sure it's entirely safe. Like, I don't know how long they'll take to make sure it's safe that they can do it, but it still is pretty cool that, this will be the first tourist, private mission, just to basically not land on, but to fly around the moon and come back. It'll still be pretty awesome. I must admit, it's cool. And not only that, Japan is actually just tonight, I was watching the Hakuto probe being launched by Tokyo iSpace. Apparently, a Japanese, a Tokyo-based private company called iSpace that appears to be funded by a lot of big Japanese companies, including JAXA itself, Citizen, Seiko. I think I saw Mitsui Sumitomo Insurance or something. Anyway, MS&AD Holdings. A lot of big sponsors behind this sort of tech startup in Tokyo that's like a space tech startup. And it turns out they've made a bunch of large satellites that are going to land on the moon and put rovers on the moon and drive around on the moon and look for water and resources that people can use when they build like towns on the moon. And the idea is that they're going to be like scout probes to be able to basically scope out setting up towns and mining operations and stuff on the moon. And they've just launched the first one of these on a SpaceX rocket tonight. And if it successfully lands on the moon, it'll be the first private moon lander ever to land on the moon. Apparently, an Israeli company did try to do this about 2 years ago, and they failed. They crashed into the surface of the moon, so they didn't land successfully. They would have been the first, but now it looks like this Tokyo company all of a sudden, yeah, they've got like a full-on big like lunar lander and rover that they've piled on top of a SpaceX rocket, and they're looking to be the first, and they've already got a bunch of missions lined up that they're going to have rovers and stuff all going all over the surface on the moon, as well as, of course, with Artemis. There's going to be Japanese astronauts on that. So Japan, always doing incredibly cool stuff in space, including the tourism stuff. So, I think this is kind of cool myself. But yeah, DJ Sunny Side Up, I just finished your 12 days of All I Want for Christmas. I took 12 songs that were popular this year and mashed it Mariah Carey, 12 separate tracks. Wow. Okay, so there are 12 remixes of Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas with tracks that you like. I hope that you can make them. Yeah, Mariah Carey, out of all of the Christmas music, which I notice, I listen to the weekly Billboard charts, and it's all Christmas music at the moment. It's not a bad song, but it's just when you get hit in the face with it 100 times a day, it gets a little bit too much. If you can do something good to make me like it again, I would appreciate that. So I will check that out. DJ Sunny Side Up. Christian, I wonder if AI parts in films will only be played by AI in the future. I think it's guaranteed. I think particularly, it's 1,000% guaranteed. If you think about background characters, imagine, I've acted as an extra in a movie, and when you tell background actors, okay, walk from here to here and have a conversation about something fun that you did last night, knock yourselves out, I don't care, and I did that. I'm pretty sure that kind of role is going to be completely AI. It'll literally be a director telling AI characters that, yes, have two people talking about a big night out that they had last night to each other, and walking around in the background and milling around in the background. Wouldn't surprise me if there have already been completely AI generated characters that act like that now. If not, it'll be in the very, very near future. I know that you're probably talking about like main parts, but I can see how actually it could do a huge thing to save on like background. You could probably make movies with just a handful of main characters and not even worry about extras anymore. Just think of the money that you'd save on that, especially if you're like low budget. Yeah, I know, very easy to imagine that. Again, I can see that as being good and bad. It's going to increase the possibilities for affordable filmmaking, but it's also possibly going to mean less need for like background actors or whatever. So we'll see. Wingstar, Ari, earlier topic about English. I heard English teaching is not as lucrative as it used to be. It is indeed not. Even Victor actually blames the flood of New Zealanders and Australians coming into Japan in the late 90s for basically flooding the market here for English teaching. It used to be, you want to hear some bad news? Not only have wages not changed like in the last 30 years in Japan, but in the 90s, it was possible to get like up to like $5,000 a month, like gojumayen a month teaching English, you could do pretty like just getting off the plane. You could just show up anywhere and get a job where you would be getting, pretty decent pay. Which now I think about it, I must admit, because I always thought like Sanjuman was doing okay and Gojuman was good, but yeah, 10,000 a month or whatever. I remember I was offered myself a job like $8,000 a month with all accommodation and meals and everything all included. In the late 90s. So that was sort of normal. That doesn't happen anymore. So yeah, we flooded the market and ruined it apparently because New Zealand and Australian governments taught everybody how to speak Japanese. So we all rushed up here for part-time jobs. And that meant all the teaching of Japanese no longer, teaching of English there's no longer any money in it. So yeah, apparently it used to be like kind of a secret gig. It was a very good gig for people who knew about it in the late 90s, and that's gone, and I think it's been getting worse. Yeah, Quint Ranked, the Moon River story would seem to contradict the earlier story about Japan not being ambitious anymore. Well, indeed, that's a perspective. I think that there are good startups in Japan. There are ambitious and creative people, but the point is it's not really the big companies that are doing those things. And look, talk about Japan not being ambitious and contradictions of that. Even companies like Toyota's released a bunch of cool cars. Like even those companies that we think are getting too big and old are still popping up and surprising. But I do think as a society overall, The drive to become the CEO of a mega trading house, that kind of ambition is definitely gone. And I think that's a good thing. I think that a lot of that talent, which might have been soaked up into these huge bureaucratic employment for life companies, a lot of those smart people are now going into startups that are launching rockets instead. And I think that that's a good thing. And again, the tech space that I work in, I see a lot of amazingly creative, small, agile tech companies and IT companies that couldn't have existed really in the economy here 20 years ago. So, I see that changing. But, well, yeah, you're right. I mean, of course, there's always going to be ambitious people. But at the same time, there's unquestionably a lot more people who are happy to live life on contracts and not aspiring to get into the rat race. I think that's the difference. Whereas the rat race used to be the only thing going. Quinn Rankin, I'm pretty sure that crowd scenes are already AI or at least multiplying crowds. Yeah, I think that's what we were talking about, Quinn Rankin. I think you'll actually probably get more. Yeah, they'll probably come more and more out of the background as the technology gets better. You might even get minor characters and so on in future, but I think that's what's already happening. DJ Sunny Side Up, how do I think you should publish it on YouTube? All in one long video or a new song until Christmas? I don't know. My channel's not really growing, so I'm not sure I'm the best to give advice on this. I think doing a video every day might get a bit much for people. I think maybe do break it up into like depends on how long it ends up being. I think if you can get videos less than 10 minutes, maybe break it up into, say if you got 40 minutes of video, break it up into 4 videos, like make them all under 10 minutes. But I think that's better than having 12 daily like 3-minute videos. I think it'll actually be more interesting to watch having like 3 or 4 videos at a time. That's actually my suggestion. But see how you go on that. Eric Bailey, I've got you. Well, lots of comments today. Good to see. Eric Bailey, how dare I start without you? Plus, you'd rather Bob Sapp. You'd rather fight Bob Sapp than listen to Mariah Carey Christmas songs. Well, yeah, it's part of the culture. What can you do? As well as Bob Sapp beating people up. Crypto Airy, good to see you. You left teaching down to 2,000 yen an hour. Horrible. Yeah, it's always one of those things that, it's a bit of a safety net for foreigners in Japan. The word, it's one. If you're a native English speaker, it's nice to know that you can always fall back on teaching English. But even that, there just aren't so many jobs because it's not so popular to learn anymore. It's nice to know it's there, and respect to people who actually make a good living off it and run businesses off it. But yeah, it's getting tougher and tougher, no doubt. Robert Brooker, good to see you, Robert Brooker. And yeah, let's keep going on the topics. 5 minutes left. Yeah, so Kishida's popularity tanking, as I mentioned before. Most companies not supporting Kishida, and this was actually before the announcement just the other day of so it looks like the Japanese Ministry of Defense looks like they want to go above the 1% voluntary cap on spending. They want to increase spending up to 2%, and they want to put a whole bunch of, they're looking at what's happening in Ukraine, and they want to put missile defenses and basically beef up Japan's defense forces all over the country. They're looking for like $2 trillion or something to spend. And yeah, in order to fund it, the government suggesting that they're going to have to increase corporate taxes for that, as well as diverting money for the rebuilding of Fukushima. Every Japanese government, every LDP government that's ever increased the sales tax has been voted out. So the sales tax probably isn't going to get touched. But yeah, the fact that he's already one of the least popular prime ministers, and his popularity is tanking mainly because of the scandals and resignations and so on. And on top of that, now he's talking about that, yeah, they are going to raise corporate taxes to, of all things, break the taboo against defense spending. Hard to see how the business community is going to keep supporting him, which is why I did think about getting a wet lettuce out of the fridge. When he announced he was going to meet Biden in January, I really wonder if he's going to make it to the Biden meeting. In fact, I actually think the fact that he is talking about raising taxes when his popularity is so low makes me think if he's just falling on his sword, like this is something that the party wants to do and he's toast anyway, so he's going to be the bad guy and get the taxes done and then resign to give the new guy a fresh start. I wonder. But yeah, Dan H, but new capitalism. Well, yeah, he's getting to it. He's going to tell us about it any day now. So that's that. Then the JLPT, I was going to talk about this earlier, got mixed up. Is this the best metric for hiring foreigners? A lot of people come out and say, as you say, for all standardized testing, that it's not really a good way to know if they really speak Japanese. I mean, there are people who can do well on the JLPT or the NLPT, as it's now called. Anyone can do well, can study for a test and do well on a test, but not be very good at talking. And people can be fluent, but just not have a stupid, meaningless piece of paper. And all of this is true. But as someone that hires people, when you're going through a whole bunch of resumes, you want to be able to have these certificates and resumes to save you the trouble. Because, I don't have the time to spend a week with somebody drinking some beers and getting to know what they're really like inside before I can assess if they're qualified to do the things I need them to do, including I need people to be bilingual. And yes, there are many, many flaws in standardized testing. And, in the end of the day, I accept that it shows, if not proficiency. I mean, generally, there's a high correlation between proficiency and doing well on the test. And in an interview, you can catch out if they can speak in a way that matches their score or not, or what the gap is. But if nothing else, what TOEIC shows, what NLPT shows, is that you cared enough about proving that you're fluent that you spent a year learning and memorizing a whole bunch of stuff, vocabulary and grammar, in the course of which you would have learned something. So yeah, I rely on it. I don't know if it's necessarily the best metric, but I think it's the best metric that it's available. Lots of people have it. I think it's reasonable that if you get one and one says that you can attend university in Japan, and many people with level 1 have attended university, and many people with N2 actually are extremely proficient. That's a better indicator than somebody, and it saves you the trouble of doing a personal assessment, which I'm not qualified to give, on the people that don't have any qualification to show me, but assure me that they're fluent, which again, you'd be surprised. A lot of people write things on resumes that aren't true, including saying that they are fluent at Japanese, but then are shocked when they find out that their interview is going to be in Japanese, and they can't do it, and it wastes a lot of time when you're going through a lot of people. So I accept all the flaws of standardized testing like NLPT, but I need it as someone who hires, and I think it makes sense. This series, I often talk about how much I love the Extra Credits channel on YouTube, but this particular series that's going on at the moment, the 3rd episode is just out, on the path to Pearl Harbor, is as usual excellent. Pardon me. Yeah, it's continuing to go through the events, including, again, just a lot of stuff which gets any narrative, the Tora movie. There's pretty much the day that lives in infamy, the way that everyone pretty much understands Pearl Harbor, the way that I grew up understanding it, is that the sneaky Japanese did a sneak attack on without warning on America all of a sudden in December 1941. And a day that will live in infamy, and everything that happened after they fully deserved. And parts of that are true, but a lot of things happened leading up to that decision to attack Pearl Harbor, in both directions. A lot of things were going on in Japan, and it wasn't a simple decision that Japan was kind of biding its time, waiting for 20 years after World War I to attack America. In fact, even right up until very late in the piece, a significant part of Japan's leadership actually still saw themselves as being allies of America and sought to remain allies of America, like military allies of America. And it wasn't, even joining the Axis was not a straightforward decision in Japan. And again, understanding just how chaotic the government was at the time. And the way that quite often, the diplomats were doing one thing and the army was ignoring them, and the politicians were isolated, and Japan was really in chaos, and it was without question the military's fault it ended up in this situation, that it did all these things. It was pretty much completely rogue. But going through the different events, I never heard of the bombing of the Panay during the rape of Nanking. A US gunship was escorting 3 US tankers out of the port of Nanking. And it was strafed by an airplane, and basically a U.S. naval ship was sunk, and many of the people were shot, including in the water. And it was clearly deliberate. They were flying American flags, and this was in 1939. And the Japanese sort of played it off and apologized, and the Americans didn't want to get into a war, so they accepted the apology. But there were all sorts of stuff before Pearl Harbor that happened that um, it's just it's much more nuanced, and there were a lot of things that went into that final step. So it's good to know the history, and it's fascinating, and a bunch of stuff I didn't know. So well worth watching. Kanara, good to see you, Kanara. There's a few Chinese in your class that passed the N2, yet they almost cannot speak Japanese. Definitely true that Chinese have a strong bias towards. Also, they hate the listening test, in my experience. I mean, not always, but statistical averages. They do very well on the kanji listening and comprehension, and they hate the listening. And I find a lot of Europeans tend to have a strong bias towards preferring the listening and hating the kanji and the reading comprehension. But in the end of the day, when you look at what percentages of people get into pass N1 and get into university and actually complete university degrees writing papers in Japanese, Chinese are far more successful, i.e., they may be a better fit for the Japanese education model as well, where you don't have to deliver papers orally in Japanese. You just have to be able to read and write well in Japanese. And Chinese tend to be good at that, and they tend to really struggle with the speaking and listening. But what can you do? Yes, well, maybe I should have polls on letting people back into the chat. So that is eggnog, and that is all the topics. So just up on time at the moment. But again, thanks for keeping me company. I am going to make some music. I can't find the right plug I need to plug in to make the music go into the machine. But I want to do that. I want to get back to making some music. So I will do that. Great to see you, Sadiq. Hakan Guru, it's good to see you there in the chat. US intelligence, ignore the intelligence provided by UK before the attack. Oh, indeed. And, not only that, but the US ignored their own intelligence. They actually detected the Japanese fleet heading towards Pearl Harbor and ignored it. I mean, there were a bunch of mistakes, and some would say, and of course, there's a whole conspiracy thing as to whether, America knowingly and deliberately pushed Japan towards this. But there again, Japan didn't have to attack America. But yeah, indeed. In fact, there's another episode where apparently in Indonesia, Japanese sort of captured a ship which had a bunch of sort of British intelligence correspondents on board, including the whole plans for defending Singapore and how unprepared they were. That tipped the Japanese off that it was a good time to go for to go for Singapore. So all kinds of episodes like, oh, you know what? In fact, I think this was the Germans pulled over a British ship when they were at war with, and they handed that correspondence over to the Japanese. That gave away that the British were completely unprepared to defend Singapore. Just stuff like that. It was great. I would love to DJ, but I can't plug in. So if I can't plug in and I can't listen to what I'm playing, I can't do this. So I'll set that up for next week. I will come back next week with that. So as I said earlier, look out for probably January 21. I'll look to do a tweet up, meetup, YouTube meetup just for people who are interested in watching this show and would like to say hello and catch up before I head away to America. If you're around in Tokyo around January 21st, I'll set details up over the course of the week. But would love to catch up with a bunch of you. Stay safe. Take care. Remember, follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, all of the things, and have a good week. I'll see you all next week. Same time, same place. Boom. Peace. Ending stream.